Well, first of all, I'm stage struck, and I think they all know that. Secondly, I try to get a film that has audience identification.
I can answer that by telling you that in those lovely moments, I play Daphnis and Chloe.
Now, the argument against what I'm saying is that the world is full. All the best young directors are soaked.
Spelled out in light bulbs, I mean. Besides something called a temperament, which consists of...
Oh, sure. Makes you strong and tall.
I don't see... My last marriage was one day, and I didn't think it will last.
Ow. The obnoxious mama.
Johnny Carson once dropped a bombshell. He exposed 9 so-called Golden Age guests who were secretly terrible people. For 3 decades, Carson invited America's biggest stars into homes every night, flashing that friendly grin and laugh that made everyone feel like they were just catching up with an old buddy. But when those bright studio lights faded and the applause died down, the real Johnny wasn't always smiling. People close to him said his charm vanished the second the cameras stopped rolling. Behind that cool exterior, the man everyone loved as America's host kept a mental blacklist, a list of stars he thought were downright awful human beings. Johnny was always a total pro on camera, revealed a longtime Tonight Show producer who worked beside him for over 10 years. But sometimes, as soon as we cut to commercial, he'd lean over to Ed and whisper, "That person should never be near a camera or a child." As Carson got older, he became bolder about what he really thought of the famous faces he'd interviewed. The stories he shared with close friends showed a darker side of Hollywood, beloved icons hiding ugly secrets behind their polished smiles. One of the most shocking tales came from Carson's own lips, about a legendary actress who looked fragile and sweet on his couch, but offstage unleashed pure venom on a young production assistant so bad that security had to break it up. And then there was the adored male star caught in such a disturbing act inside his dressing room that Carson nearly called the police on him. These weren't just tough personalities or demanding divas. Carson believed some of them were straight-up predators, abusers, and manipulators. People who used fame as a mask while the industry turned a blind eye for decades. But before we dive into those twisted stories, let's start with the first name that made Carson's blood boil, and the secret backstage showdown no one's ever revealed until now. Well, first of all, I'm stage-struck, and I think they all know that. Secondly, I try to get a film that has audience identification. Those were the polished words of Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen who could freeze a room with her stare. When she appeared on The Tonight Show in 1970, audiences saw pure old-school glamour. The posture, the poise, the perfect hair, every move rehearsed like a performance in itself. But behind the scenes, that polished charm melted away fast. According to several Tonight Show staff members, Crawford off-camera was colder than ice. She was one of the coldest people I've ever interviewed, Carson later told his biographer. Like talking to a beautiful statue with nothing inside. Even before she set foot in the studio, the crew could tell this wasn't going to be easy. Her team sent in a 4-page list of demands, everything from lighting angles to how far her chair should be from Johnny's desk, even the temperature in the studio. Exactly 67 degrees. Not 66, not 68, recalled a former producer. Everything had to be perfect for Joan. She arrived hours early, bringing her own makeup artists, even though the show already had award-winning pros. The diva treatment was in full swing. But what really exposed Crawford's true character was how she treated people based on rank. She practically curtsied to Johnny, said a stagehand who saw it all. But when a young production assistant walked into her dressing room with the water she'd asked for, Crawford lost it. Witnesses said she exploded, screaming at the poor assistant, a 20-year-old just trying to do her job. Crawford allegedly called her a brainless little tramp and sneered that she should work at a brothel where her looks might actually help. The assistant ran out crying, and Crawford demanded she be fired on the spot. Carson's producer refused, and the tension hung over the entire show. Still, what disturbed Johnny the most wasn't the outburst. It was how easily Crawford flipped her mask back on once the cameras rolled. She was like a machine pretending to be human, one producer said. Every answer, every laugh, every gesture, rehearsed. During commercial breaks, she'd freeze, face blank, not saying a single word. Then, when the red light blinked back on, she'd spring to life again, all smiles and sparkle. Carson, who could make almost anyone feel relaxed, found her impossible to connect with. After the show, he reportedly sighed to Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford released her explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest, revealing the alleged abuse Joan's adopted children endured, Carson wasn't even surprised. Friends said he quietly nodded and muttered, "I saw who she really was that day. I believe every word." But if Joan's icy arrogance chilled Johnny, his next nemesis represented something even darker. Raw power used to intimidate and control. Enter Frank Sinatra, the charming bully Carson couldn't stand. On screen, they looked like buddies. Sinatra joked, sang, and told slick stories while Carson played the polite host. But off camera, Johnny couldn't stomach him. He admired Sinatra's voice, sure, but hated how he treated people when he thought no one important was watching. If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer, Carson once told a friend. And sometimes I think he was both. Whenever Sinatra came on the show, the atmosphere shifted. Crew members felt it instantly, a chill in the air. He'd roll in with a pack of tough-looking men, usually 7 or 8 of them, and none of them seemed like showbiz types. More like the kind of guys you'd avoid in a dark alley, one staffer remembered. They'd scatter across the studio, standing in corners, silently watching everyone. "It felt like being under surveillance," said a cameraman. But what truly made Carson uneasy was how Sinatra treated anyone beneath his status. During one early 70s appearance, a floor manager gave Sinatra the standard 3-minute warning before his segment, a totally normal part of TV production, and that's when things took a turn. According to several people who saw it happen, Frank Sinatra suddenly grabbed the floor manager by his tie and yanked him close, growling, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The poor guy, an experienced crew member and a Korean War vet in his 50s, was visibly shaken. When Johnny Carson saw the scene unfold on his office monitor, he almost canceled the entire segment right then. The only thing that stopped him was a producer quietly reminding him how much ratings Sinatra brought in. And that wasn't the only problem. Sinatra's reputation for unreliability drove Carson crazy. He canceled on the show more than once, sometimes with no warning at all. One time, he was literally already inside the building 2 hours before taping when he suddenly decided, not tonight. He just left. But the real turning point came during a commercial break when Sinatra, thinking no one important was listening, made a nasty remark about a female staff member's looks, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Carson, normally cool and detached, went stone cold and shot back, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The tension was instant. Sinatra looked stunned. Nobody, not even Johnny Carson, usually dared challenge him. When the cameras came back on, both men plastered on their fake smiles and acted like everything was fine. But the crew noticed something different. Carson's questions got shorter, sharper, colder. After that episode, Carson told his producer flat out, "I don't care how many people tune in for him, limit Sinatra to once a year, max." For a man who rarely interfered with guest bookings, that said everything. Carson could fake politeness, but deep down he had zero tolerance for people who used fame to bully others. While Sinatra showed the dark side of power, Carson's next guest had a different problem. Ego so big, it refused to fit inside the studio. This was Orson Welles, the genius who acted like rules were for other people. Every time Welles appeared on The Tonight Show, it made unforgettable television. His thunderous voice, dramatic flair, and stories about his legendary past always drew in the crowd. But what the viewers saw as brilliance, Carson and his crew saw as chaos. Behind the scenes, Welles behaved like the show was his personal stage, and everyone else was lucky to be in his presence. "Never again," Carson reportedly muttered after one particularly painful interview. "That guy thinks he's still running Rome." The trouble often started days before Welles even arrived. According to former writers, he'd tear up their question sheets, scoffing that they were pedestrian and obvious. One recalled, "He literally crossed everything out and handed us a blank page." That left Carson stranded, interviewing one of cinema's greatest minds with no prep and no direction. And Welles didn't make it easier. He loved long, winding monologues that were impossible to cut for time. During one mid-1970s taping, Welles was slotted for a quick 7-minute chat. Instead, he took over for nearly 25 minutes. Johnny tried all his usual cues, tapping his pencil, glancing at the clock, subtle hand gestures, but Welles ignored them all. 2 other guests never even made it on air that night. And he wasn't just difficult with Johnny, he was condescending to the crew. He'd speak as if people weren't even there, barking things like, "Tell the girl I need more water," or "Ask the boy to fix that light." The arrogance was unreal. One producer said Welles even tried to direct the cameraman himself. "He stood up and started telling us which angles to use." they remembered. Johnny was furious. After another exhausting appearance, Carson vented to Ed McMahon. Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show. For Carson, a perfectionist who respected the craft of live television, Welles's disregard for structure was infuriating. Publicly, he still praised the filmmaker's brilliance, but privately, he saw Welles as a walking warning, proof that too much ego could bury even the greatest talent. And then came the guest who brought chaos of a totally different kind, someone whose sharp tongue could cut through steel. That was none other than Bette Davis, Hollywood's queen of verbal violence. When Bette Davis appeared on The Tonight Show, she dazzled viewers, telling sharp, funny stories in that famous, smoky voice, all wrapped in elegance and old Hollywood charm. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, she could turn on a dime. Those who worked the show said her energy off-screen was fierce, sometimes flat-out hostile. Carson himself was shaken. "She doesn't need a stage," he told Ed McMahon afterward. "She needs a courtroom. Nobody should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." Her first problem? Other guests. If the night's lineup included multiple celebrities, Bette Davis often refused to share the spotlight. She'd interrupt, talk over people, or even turn her back to them mid-conversation. If someone else got laughs, a former coordinator recalled, you could see her fuming, just waiting to snatch control back. And backstage, it got worse. Davis reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before every appearance. Not unusual for that era, but her drinking sometimes fueled brutal outbursts. Staff members remembered her making biting, inappropriate comments that left people stunned. One producer put it bluntly, when she was charming, she could light up the room. But when she was angry, everyone cleared out fast. Bette Davis didn't just have a sharp tongue, she had no filter. Crew members recalled her using sexist and racist remarks that stunned people, even for that era. One makeup artist remembered her refusing help, saying she wanted someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drunk. It was cruel and unnecessary. Johnny Carson, who usually avoided confrontation, finally snapped one day when Davis started tearing into a cue card holder for being too slow. During rehearsal, Johnny actually stepped in, remembered a production assistant who witnessed it. He told her quietly but firmly, "Ms. Davis, on this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." Davis froze, probably shocked that anyone dared challenge her, but she backed down. For Carson, the real struggle with Bette Davis wasn't just her attitude, it was the contradiction between her brilliance and her behavior. She was a legend, no question, and Johnny admired her work deeply. But after her final Tonight Show visit in the early 80s, he'd had enough. "That's the last time," he reportedly told his producer. "Life's too short to be verbally flogged by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has." And if Davis's sharp words were exhausting, Carson's next difficult guest brought something far worse: uncomfortable behavior toward young women that crossed every professional line. It was Mickey Rooney, the aging child star whose off-camera antics left staff horrified. Mickey Rooney had once been pure Hollywood royalty, topping the box office from 1939 to 1941. His visits to The Tonight Show should have been golden moments, celebrating an incredible career. Instead, they turned into total chaos. "He thinks being short gives him license to be a creep," Carson reportedly told his producer after one disastrous night in the mid-1970s. By then, Rooney was in his mid-50s and known among female staff for inappropriate touching, flirty comments, and a total disregard for boundaries. Multiple assistants requested reassignment whenever he was booked. He'd grab your hand when you brought him water, pull you closer, ask if you were married, recalled one former assistant. And if you tried to step away, he'd hold your wrist a little too long. It was awful. Things only got worse when Rooney drank. According to staff, he appeared visibly intoxicated on at least 3 separate shows, slurring words and losing his train of thought mid-sentence. During one infamous segment in 1977, he began telling a story about Judy Garland that quickly turned inappropriate, forcing Carson to cut him off live on air. When cameras went to break, Johnny turned to his producer and muttered, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" Part of the issue was generational. Rooney came from an old Hollywood where certain behavior was normalized. Johnny wasn't uptight, but he had clear lines about respect, explained a longtime director. Rooney just didn't get it. He acted genuinely confused whenever someone called him out, as if he couldn't understand why people were upset. After one show where Rooney made repeated comments about a young actress appearing that night, Carson did something rare. He personally apologized to her after filming. "I've never seen Johnny so embarrassed," said a crew member. He told her, "That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again." And true to his word, it didn't. Rooney's appearances dwindled in the late 70s and early 80s. When he was booked, Carson reportedly demanded daytime pre-tapings just to avoid any live disasters. Still, while Rooney's antics were messy, Carson's next headache came from a whole different breed of star, one whose outrageous demands turned every visit into a circus. Enter Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who drove Johnny Carson absolutely crazy. With her thick Hungarian accent, flashy outfits, and flirtatious charm, Zsa Zsa was a fan favorite. She'd been on The Tonight Show dozens of times, and audiences adored her over-the-top personality. But behind the curtain, she was one of the most demanding guests the crew had ever faced. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson once joked after one of her appearances. "At least a cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting." Her list of pre-show requirements was legendary and ridiculous. She wanted her dressing room kept at exactly 74 degrees. Orchids only, never carnations. Perrier water with precisely 3 ice cubes, and her own lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. Oh, and no female guests under 40 could appear on the same episode. "Her list read like a comedy sketch," laughed one talent coordinator. "We thought it was a joke the first time we saw it." But Gabor wasn't joking. If her rules weren't met, she'd flat out refuse to leave her dressing room, throwing production into chaos and delaying taping for hours. One infamous night, she showed up to find that the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation, and all hell broke loose. According to several witnesses, she shouted at the head makeup artist and demanded someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to buy it. Johnny himself had to intervene. He called her and said something like, "Zsa Zsa, darling, you already look beautiful, and we've got a show to do. Let's save the makeup emergency for another day," recalled a former producer. But Johnny wasn't amused. He was exhausted. What bothered him most wasn't just her demands. It was how her drama threw the entire show off schedule. When one person acted like they were bigger than the production, it disrupted everything. Zsa Zsa Gabor didn't just slow things down, she threw the entire Tonight Show into chaos. Other guests would sit around waiting, crew members were forced into overtime, and the night's carefully planned schedule turned into a complete mess. After one appearance where Gabor arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about her introduction, Carson finally snapped. He told his executive producer, "Next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll gladly play her sidekick." Despite all the drama, Gabor kept coming back. It was proof of just how magnetic she was once those cameras started rolling. Johnny might have dreaded her diva antics, but even he couldn't deny she knew how to light up the screen. Still, while Gabor's demands were pure chaos, Carson's next troublesome guest brought a different kind of storm. Someone whose unpredictable behavior could turn a fun interview into a total showdown. Shelley Winters, the unpredictable powder keg. Shelley was a 2-time Oscar winner and a Hollywood veteran whose career stretched from glamorous leading lady days to powerhouse character roles. On paper, she was the perfect guest, experienced, funny, and full of stories. But in real life, she was a walking wild card. "Shelley doesn't talk, she detonates," Carson reportedly joked after one of her explosive appearances. Staff members said Winters was notorious for ignoring The Tonight Show's lighthearted vibe. Instead of swapping fun stories or promoting new projects, she'd go off on intense rants about politics or personal trauma, leaving Johnny visibly squirming in his seat. During one mid-70s interview, what began as a simple chat about her latest film suddenly turned into a 5-minute monologue about government corruption. Carson had no idea how to bring the energy back up for a commercial. Johnny was the best in the business at controlling a conversation, said a former director. But with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado. Once she started, all he could do was wait for her to calm down. And Winters' unpredictability wasn't just about her words. She was known for sudden actions, too. Her reputation for fiery temper even extended overseas. In one infamous British talk show appearance, she threw a glass of whiskey in fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made a sexist comment. That moment made Tonight Show producers extra cautious. "When Shelley was coming in, we'd literally hide anything that could be thrown," a stage manager admitted. "Glasses, paperweights, anything, we cleared the table." Still, what made Shelley different from Carson's other problem guests was that her wild behavior came from conviction, not cruelty. She wasn't mean, just fiery. She cared deeply about social issues and used every platform, including late-night TV, to speak her mind, whether it fit the tone or not. Carson, though visibly uncomfortable at times, respected her honesty. After one passionate anti-Vietnam War rant, he told his producer, "I may not want to take a vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says." Still, her unpredictability was exhausting. By the late years of Carson's run, Winters' visits became rare. Johnny preferred guests who flowed with the show, not against it. But just when he thought he'd seen it all, the next guest crossed a line that Johnny couldn't ignore: extreme political views that targeted vulnerable people. Jane Russell, the star whose politics Johnny Carson couldn't stomach. Russell was one of Hollywood's biggest icons of the 1940s and 50s. With her striking looks in classic films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she was pure old-school movie royalty. Naturally, she seemed like a dream guest for The Tonight Show, but after only a few early 70s appearances, she was suddenly gone, and insiders knew exactly why. According to staff, Carson grew increasingly uncomfortable with Russell's extreme political views and the way she treated certain people behind the scenes. While Johnny leaned moderate in his politics, he made one rule clear: The Tonight Show was neutral territory. Guests could talk about their projects, even share opinions, but personal attacks were off limits. Johnny could handle disagreement, a former producer explained. What he couldn't stand was cruelty. Unfortunately, Russell's behavior backstage crossed that line more than once. Crew members remembered her making harsh remarks about LGBTQ+ staff members. During one taping in the early 70s, she allegedly refused to let a gay makeup artist work on her, demanding someone else replace him. That didn't sit right with Carson, especially since he had close friends and colleagues in the LGBTQ+ community. Even more disturbing, a talent coordinator recalled that Russell refused to appear on the same episode as Rock Hudson, making nasty comments about his sexuality, something Hollywood insiders quietly knew about, even before it became public. Johnny was ahead of his time, the coordinator said. He didn't tolerate discrimination, especially on his stage. Carson's breaking point came in 1973. During a commercial break, Russell made dismissive comments about civil rights laws, remarks that weren't caught on the microphones but were overheard by multiple crew members. Word got back to Johnny, and that was it. After that night, Jane Russell's name disappeared from the Tonight Show guest list. For good. What made that decision remarkable was how rarely Carson banned anyone outright. He wasn't quick to judge, and he respected Hollywood legends, even the difficult ones. But this was different. Russell's words had crossed a moral line Johnny refused to ignore. For a man who usually stayed neutral, his quiet decision to blacklist her spoke volumes. While Jane Russell's politics left a permanent crack between her and Carson, there was one star who hit a nerve like no other. Someone Johnny straight up couldn't stand. His final and deepest dislike was saved for a man whose public image and private behavior were like night and day. Jerry Lewis, the comedian Johnny Carson once called truly hateful. Jerry Lewis was a legend, a superstar comedian, actor, and director who practically defined slapstick in American comedy. He hosted his famous telethons for muscular dystrophy, earning a reputation as a selfless humanitarian. On stage, he was a whirlwind of jokes, wild faces, and nonstop energy. But behind the curtain, that's where the story changed. According to numerous Tonight Show staff accounts, Lewis was one of the hardest celebrities to work with in all of Hollywood, demeaning, arrogant, and impossible to please. His name wasn't just on Carson's bad side. It was engraved on his personal blacklist. He's what happens when ego outruns talent, Carson reportedly told a colleague after one particularly painful Lewis appearance in the mid-1970s. Unlike other troublesome guests who only snapped at underlings, Lewis didn't discriminate. He came for Johnny himself. During one infamous taping, Lewis constantly interrupted Carson, hijacked questions meant for other guests, and at one point even reached across and adjusted Johnny's tie on camera. It was a small gesture, but one that crossed a big line. Johnny hated being touched without permission, a former producer explained. It was a known rule. Nobody touches Carson unless he starts it. Lewis knew that. He did it anyway just to flex his power. And his treatment of the Tonight Show crew? Even worse. Multiple insiders said Lewis refused to learn anyone's name, calling them "Hey you" or "Camera guy" or "Makeup girl," no matter how senior they were. His disrespect was so blatant that one moment in particular became legendary among staff. A camera operator coughed softly during rehearsal, and Lewis lost it. He stopped everything and screamed, accusing the poor cameraman of breathing like an amateur. and demanded he be kicked off set. Jerry screamed at a camera op for breathing, confirmed a former floor manager. Not talking, breathing! The poor guy just had allergies. For Carson, this wasn't just bad manners, it was hypocrisy. He couldn't stand the contrast between Jerry's saintly image on television and the way he treated real people off camera. It made Johnny's skin crawl, recalled one producer. He'd see Jerry crying on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like dirt. After Lewis's final Tonight Show appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his producer, "Never again." And he meant it. Jerry Lewis joined the short but infamous list of celebrities quietly blacklisted from Carson's couch during his final decade. Years later, at a private dinner, someone brought up Lewis's name, and Carson's reaction stunned everyone at the table. With no hesitation, he said, "In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some doing." That one sentence said it all. Johnny Carson's behind-the-scenes opinions about his most difficult guests, Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Bette Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis, offer something few people ever got to see. An unfiltered look at old Hollywood's real personalities. Behind the glitz and charm, Carson saw everything. For 30 years, every major star had to go through him to reach America, said a longtime producer. He knew exactly who was genuine and who was faking it. And that's what made his private judgment so valuable. Johnny had no reason to lie. He wasn't a tabloid reporter chasing a headline. He was the most powerful man in late-night television, a gatekeeper to fame. He didn't gain anything by calling out stars. If anything, honesty could only hurt him. Johnny didn't want enemies, his former producer said. He wanted peace. But when he disliked someone, it was because they made it impossible not to. Carson was in a unique position. Part talk show host, part confessor to the stars. Celebrities revealed more sitting on his couch than they did anywhere else, and Johnny saw through the performances. That's why his private opinions mattered. They came from someone who'd met everyone. He also knew how to separate the merely difficult from the genuinely toxic. Nervousness, ego, he could handle that. But cruelty, especially toward people with less power, was the deal breaker. Johnny had a simple test, recalled his longtime director. How did they treat the pages, the assistants, the camera guys? That told him everything about their real character. And time has only proven him right. After Carson's passing in 2005, many of his judgments were confirmed. Christina Crawford's shocking claims about her mother, Joan, long whispered reports about Sinatra's mob connections, and disturbing stories about Mickey Rooney's behavior, all eventually came to light. Carson hadn't been harsh, he'd just seen the truth years before the public did. What's even more chilling is how easily the old Hollywood system protected its stars. Even when everyone behind the scenes knew about bad behavior, studios, networks, and magazines buried it to protect their profits. Today, one cell phone video could end a career, said a former Tonight Show writer. Back then, someone could throw a chair at an assistant, and as long as they sold tickets, nobody said a word. So when people look back on Hollywood's so-called golden age, Carson's unfiltered blacklist is a powerful reminder. It wasn't all charm and champagne. The stars who dazzled America were still just human, flawed, fragile, and sometimes downright cruel. Johnny used to say, "The camera doesn't just add 10 pounds, it adds a layer of fiction," remembered one producer. His real gift wasn't just interviewing people, it was seeing through the act, right down to who they really were. And in the end, that's what made Carson timeless, not just as a host, but as the sharpest observer of fame Hollywood ever had. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if you felt something real, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go beyond the spotlight.